On the one hand, some people tend to romanticize the lifestyle of monks, nuns, or monastics in general, and praise the lifestyle of homelessness in many different ways. On the other hand, there are lots of people who are talking about the corruptness of modern monastic traditions, modern monastic schools, and how little the conditions are, or how different the conditions are from back in the days as compared to modern monkhood, and as compared with the many corruptions in many Buddhist countries in the entirety of the world. So today's monkhood is clearly, at least in the vast majority of cases, not what it once was. And while it should be clear that monkhood or monasticism is the preferred way of practice, today we want to shed some light on the real differences, real benefit, and real shortcomings and challenges of both the monastic lifestyle and the lay lifestyle, and have a look at the various different typical days. Let's put it like that. Well, since this channel very likely has mostly lay people following, I want to start with a typical day in the life of a householder. And I think for the vast majority of people, I do not have to tell you what it is like. But I think we have to distinguish between a practitioner, a somewhat serious practitioner, and someone whose mind is strongly intent on sensual pursuit. Let's put it like that. But in any case, there are still some differences and some similarities between both lifestyles. Because first, roughly 8 hours each day of both normal and sensual householders is very likely focused on sleeping. Then another part, roughly 8 hours, will be focused on working. And then we have other aspects that can vary from person to person. So if you are living a somewhat healthy lifestyle, you have more or less 8 to 10, maybe if you're very lucky, 12 hours to do whatever you wish. Some part of that will be, for example, targeted towards maintenance of your house, of your apartment, some cooking, some taking care of your children, some socializing. And the vast majority of the remainder of the time will very likely be targeted towards sensual pursuit of various different kinds. And the younger you are, the more of your time is likely directed towards a sensual pursuit. And this is just a rule of thumb. There are many spiritual practitioners who started at a very young age, who are totally not used to a lifestyle of sensuality. And those people are very fortunate, and they are very few. But most of the time, young people tend to play childish games, as a Buddha would put it, and that is just sensuality in a nutshell. Playing video games, watching pornography, listening to lots of music. To them, all kinds of sensuality are kind of new and exciting and enticing, so they did not grow very when it comes to sensuality. And now we might have a look at the typical lifestyle of a modern monk. And they too have to spend a considerable time, a proportion of their day, sleeping. They also have to do some work. They have to, for example, sew their own robes. They have to do whatever maintenance work is necessary to maintain the monastery they are living in. They have to go on Pindapat. They have to do some construction work, oftentimes with the help of lay people or lay guests. They have to eat. They have to perform certain rituals like evening pujas or something, where they are doing some chanting, where they're doing some recitations of suttas, where they are answering the questions of practitioners. They have to do some teaching. They have to do some translating. And if there's any time left, they also have to follow their meditation schedule, because in the end, their main pursuit is the pursuit of liberation. And everything else should come secondary. And if they are serious monks, then everything else will come secondary. But as you can see, I would at least say that the first half of the day until midday, when the meal has been consumed and the bowl has been washed and everything, is usually dedicated not towards the practice, at least solely. It's more dedicated towards taking care of the body, taking care of the monastery, taking care of social relationships, taking care of the finances of the monastery, basically keeping everything going. Taking care of firewood, taking care of heating in winter, taking care of the robes, taking care of arms around, etc. There are lots of things that you have to do. The livelihood of a monk, at least of a modern monk, at least those that I have encountered thus far, is not as simple as it was back in the days. And even back in the days, there were likely lots of mundane tasks that you still had to do that are not listed in the suttas, because they were so common that it was not really worth mentioning. Yeah. But in the end, as you can see, I would say that half the day, even for monastics, is dedicated towards work of various different kinds. So what is left in the end is maybe, I would say, in good monasteries, between 6 to 8 hours of practice time, which is a lot. But it's not much more than what you can get as a lay practitioner if you are very dedicated and have taken care of your circumstances in a very targeted manner, I would say. Yeah, and now we can have a comparison with the day in the life of a monk or arahant of the old. And in that time, or during that time, at least according to the suttas, I cannot verify any of that, obviously, but we cannot verify anything at all. So, but it still makes sense to take it as a point of comparison. Monks back then did exceptionally little. Many were already established in samadhi way before they became monks under the Buddha. They were sleeping exceptionally little. There were people who were wearers of rag robes, or people who were just wearing rough hemp robes, people who were doing all kinds of dhutanga practices. There were people who went on alms round just once a day, who were eating very little, and also very little teaching was involved. Most of the time, at least if you would follow the instructions of the Buddha, was dedicated towards abiding apart from sensuality, or dwelling in jhana. Which does not mean sitting on the meditation cushion, by the way, but really just being apart from sensuality. Non-entanglement with the senses. And this is the practice, I would say. So as you can see, there's a stark contrast between the prime time of Buddhism, when the Buddha was still around, and I would say that that was a prime time, if there was any prime time of Buddhism. But even then, it was already a niche interest. But nowadays, circumstances have grown very different, at least in the part of the world where you cannot be outside pretty much 24/7, 265 days a year. You have to take care of lots of things, and even monks nowadays are a bit like miniature householders who take care of a very tiny house that is not their own, but they are still having the duties that comes with living in one place all the time. So at least in that regard, the lifestyles are not too different. And in the end, the work of monks and nuns and the work of lay practitioners, it's the same. To escape sensuality, you have to be non-entangled with the world of the senses. The practice is no different between wielding the official title of a monk or a nun and just being a lay practitioner. And I can, for example, give you an example snippet or sutta snippet from Majjhima Nikaya number 27. And there it goes. A householder or householder's son, or one born in some other clan, hears the Dhamma. On hearing the Dhamma, he acquires faith in the Tathagata. Possessing that faith, he considers thus: household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide and open. It is not easy, while living at home, to lead the holy life, utterly perfect and pure, as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, and put on the yellow robes, and go forth from home life into homelessness. On a later occasion, abandoning small or large fortune, abandoning a small or large circle of relatives, he shaves off his hair and beard, puts on the yellow robes, and goes forth from the home life into homelessness. And as you can see from the snippet, it's a stock phrase that occurs quite often in the suttas. People back then regarded the homeless life very highly. And I think it should be regarded very highly, because you cut your ties with the sensual world. You cut your ties with the world as a whole. And there are many problems with the household life. It is very easy to give in to sensual impulses, as an example, when you have everything available at the click of a button, when you have a connection to the internet, as an example. I think one of the monks in Muttodaya calls the internet Mara's playfield, Mara's second playfield. And I think he's very right in mentioning that, because access to the internet is probably one of the things that is most detrimental when it comes to triggering material. Even if it is not a gross kind of sensuality, it's full of distractions that can appear wholesome on the surface. But deep down, it's just sensual. Because any interaction, any interest towards, any lusting towards sensual interactions, let's put it like that, is a distraction. And sensuality, as such, is always close by, and all the attachments that we hold are always close by. Our surroundings and habits, overall, are usually a reflection of our internal values. So people who truly do not value sensuality usually live a lifestyle that reflects that and behave in ways that reflect their disinterest in sensuality. And behavior and values overall are inseparable. So when someone tells you that virtue is not important, then I have bad news for them, because virtue is all about behavior and speech, and you cannot really be internally, on the level of the mind, liberated and still behave in ways that are leading you towards sensuality. In the suttas, the Buddha pretty much says as much. He quite frequently says that, for example, a monk is considered to be a monk because he does the renunciation things. A warrior is regarded as a warrior because of his behavior, because of his doing of warrior things and his acquisitions that are related to warriorhood. The same for priests, the same for farmers, and many other occupations. Those things are borrowed. Those are your acquisitions, so to speak. The same is true for monkhood and all the other things. So your internal values are reflected in your behavior, and that is something that we should keep in mind. So when we are still living at home, there is still something that is holding us back. Sometimes, in very rare cases, the lay environment is likely equally suitable for practice. But for the vast majority of people, I do not think that that is the case. And the suttas also explain that, for example, the perceptions of a village can be quite detrimental as compared with the perceptions of a forest. And there's an entire sutta that talks pretty much about that. The Buddha essentially states there that a person who has a gathered mind, who has a composed mind, who is dwelling in samadhi, but who chooses to spend time in the village, will sooner or later fall away from concentration, while a person with a scattered mind, with an unconcentrated mind, with an uncomposed mind, but who convinces his mind to spend time in the forest and focuses on forest perceptions, for such a person, only increase in the practice is to be expected. So after a while, their mind will be composed and concentrated. So if you lay down your ropes, but internally keep all the values intact, then it's very likely that you will revert to sensuality at some point. And if you have a look at, for example, the laying down of ropes rate of monks and nuns, then it paints a very grim picture, because I would say that in, 5 to 10 years, at least half of the monks will disrobe. And if over the span of an entire life, I would say that the number is much higher. So those people have not abandoned the value of sensuality as wholeheartedly as they might have initially believed. And in some cases, even if you look at the suttas, there were cases of arahants, probably extreme cases, because I've only encountered one such sutta, where one monk reverted back to sensuality 7 times and reordained before he finally made it to arahantship. And the Buddha gave countless similes whenever someone wanted to revert back to sensuality. The simile of the lump of meat, the simile of the skeleton, the simile of the vultures, and whatever they're called. At all times, he wanted to show the perils of sensuality, how little gratification was in there. And monkhood overall is all about being apart from sensuality, about drying off from sensuality, because it is a main source of gratifications that we have. The uninstructed worldling has no other source of peace but to give in to his sensual pursuit. That is all he knows. And the main problem is that the tasks as a householder are too absorbing to practice sati sampajanya or yoniso manasikara. So you cannot really reflect about your intentionality when you work a standard demanding job as a householder. And in the end, it is simply an equation of time. There is, on the one hand, time you can spend on the Dhamma, and there is time that you cannot spend on the Dhamma. And at some point, if you want to make it to arahantship, all of your time, without any exception, has to be spent on the Dhamma and on nothing else. So as long as that is not the case, even with the most wholesome seeming occupation that you are following, in the end, if you are very close to arahantship or anagamihot or something like that, even that becomes a hindrance, even if it is exceptionally wholesome from the point of view of a normal Pitujana, of one of the many. But anyway, there are lots of benefits of good monkhood. There are lots of protective rules that help you not to revert back to the lower life. There's lots of time that you can have alone, that you can have to yourself, and that you can use to practice wholeheartedly, at least 6 to 8 hours each day. And then there are retreat times. The rains, for example, are times that are reserved wholeheartedly for practice. And that is much more than most householders could ever get. And there is much more distance towards gross sensuality than you can get compared to a household setting. And living, you essentially become a living example of dependent origination. Your life is fully dependent on the support of others. You experience, you live, you become dependent origination. You would die if other people would not provide your food, your shelter, your robes, etc. And in the end, there are also other like-minded people. And the majority of your day will be occupied by very simple tasks that allow for Yoniso Manasikara, that allow for reflection, that allow for Sati Sampajanya, if I pronounce that correctly. I'm not very good with Pali. So yeah. In the end, as an example, I think Majjhima Nikaya 10 states it rather nicely. There it is said, furthermore, a mendicant acts with situational awareness, or Sati Sampajanya, I think, when going out and coming back, when looking ahead and aside, when bending and extending the limbs, when bearing the outer robes, bowel and robes, when eating, drinking, chewing and tasting, when urinating and defecating, when walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, waking, speaking, and keeping silent. Very important. And all those activities are exceptionally simple. It is something that you can use, or those are activities where you can maintain your situational awareness, especially when you are silent, when you are doing nothing. That is a prime opportunity to actually practice. And yeah, so the optimal day in the life of a monk is more or less filled with just abiding in non-activity. But this is a very advanced kind of practice. Do not try to do that too early, because you will do it out of sensuality. You have to first clarify the practice sufficiently. You have to clarify your intentions. You have to clarify your view until you basically have the right view. Before that, or very close to that, then it starts making sense to actually spend time in non-activity. So yeah, but the optimal day consists of a bit more. While you would want to maintain your Yoniso Manasikara at all times, you still have to do some work duties in the morning, as little as possible. You have to do some walking for alms and some eating. You have to clean your bowels. You have to sometimes clean your robes and everything. And then you have to go somewhere that is secluded. And then you are pretty much spending your time there, either sitting or walking, until it is time to go to bed. Exceptionally boring by lay people standards. And I think the Theragatha also has something to say on that. And it says, he has attained the perfection of wisdom, so intelligent and thoughtful. He is bright, but seems to be dull. He always wanders quenched. So, from the outside, if you do not know the internal life of a highly advanced practitioner, he will very likely look very dumb and empty-minded to you, while he is very intelligent and very thoughtful, but he is not showing it to the outside. But anyway, I think now you should have a much better understanding when it comes to the differences between the home life and homelessness, and we can now come to the most important points of this video. First, both monk and lay life can be done with or without craving. Just ordaining does not mean that you are actually practicing the right kind of practice, that you are actually moving towards Nibbana. That is far from the truth, and the disrobe numbers or statistics should reflect that very well. Yet, it is much easier to stay craving-free as a monk, or even when there is strong craving arriving, due to the barriers that you have erected. It's much harder to revert back to the lower life. Basically, before you do a transgression, before you engage with sensuality, you have to tell the other monks what you are about to do. And as such, you are very likely to not do that, even if your mind is basically overcome by thirst for sensuality. You have erected barriers that protect you from falling back too far. And the household life has many problems in comparison to that. There are no barriers. There's nothing that is holding you back from overindulging at all times. But if you are a very dedicated practitioner, immersed with the mind and samadhi, then it all becomes a matter of time and simplicity. If you can live a very simple life, there's nothing that is holding you back from becoming an anagami in this life. But even a mediocre monk lifestyle is usually superior to a household lifestyle, even to a good one. You have to create a very good environment for practice if you want to stay a lay person for whatever reason. And if you are very serious about the practice, then at some point you should probably consider to become a monastic. But anyway, this should be enough for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you enjoy what we do here, feel free to like, subscribe to the YouTube things. And until then, I wish you a pleasant day and goodbye.